3 words from a 19-year-old girl silenced the entire Family Feud studio. Steve Harvey dropped his cards and stared at Ashley Thompson, who stood at the family podium with tears streaming down her face. What she said next would break every rule of television and change how everyone in that room understood family. It was Thursday afternoon at the Steve Harvey Studios in Atlanta. The Thompson family from Portland was facing off against the Williams family from Charlotte. The energy was infectious as always, with Steve working the crowd and both families bringing their competitive spirit to the stage. Ashley Thompson stood at the end of her family's podium, barely reaching the buzzer. She wore a simple blue dress from a thrift store that she'd picked out carefully for this day. Her dark hair was pulled back neatly, and she carried herself with the kind of quiet dignity that comes from surviving things most people never have to face. What the audience didn't know was that Ashley wasn't really a Thompson at all. The foster care system had placed her with Sarah and Mark Thompson when she was 16. After her 14th placement had failed, she was what social workers called a difficult case. Not because she was troublesome, but because she'd been hurt so many times that trusting anyone felt impossible. The Thompson family was different from the others. Sarah and Mark had been foster parents for over 20 years, opening their home to more than 60 children. They understood that some kids came with invisible wounds that took time to heal. Ashley had lived with them for 3 years now, longer than she'd stayed anywhere since she was 7. They treated her with genuine kindness, invited her to family gatherings, helped her apply for college, but despite their love, Ashley still felt like she was playing a role, pretending to be someone's daughter when she'd never truly belonged to anyone. Steve had noticed Ashley during the family introductions. There was something about quiet contestants that always drew his attention. Maybe it reminded him of his own childhood struggles, or maybe it was the way they observed everything with careful, knowing eyes that seemed older than their years. "And who do we have here?" Steve had asked during introductions, kneeling down slightly to meet Ashley's eyes with his signature warmth. She had replied softly, her voice barely audible over the audience's enthusiastic applause. "I'm Ashley Thompson," she said, the name feeling foreign in her mouth, even after 3 years. Her voice carried a formality that seemed unusual for someone her age, the careful politeness of someone who'd learned early that making the wrong impression could mean losing everything. "Ashley Thompson, and what do you do?" Steve had continued with his usual charm. "I'm a freshman at Portland Community College," she replied, not mentioning that she was working 2 part-time jobs to pay for classes, or that she'd been accepted to Portland State but couldn't afford the tuition. Steve had smiled that warm smile that had endeared him to millions, but something in Ashley's tone made him look at her just a moment longer than usual before moving on to the next family member. The game progressed normally for the first 2 rounds. The Thompson family had taken an early lead with some solid answers, and Steve was in his element, working the crowd, making jokes, and creating those moments of connection that made Family Feud more than just a game show. During the second round, when the category was things that make you feel safe, Sarah Thompson had confidently answered family support, earning them the number 2 spot on the board. The family had celebrated together, but Ashley had remained noticeably quiet, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. But during the third round, everything changed. The question seemed innocent enough, the kind of survey response that typically brought families closer together on stage. Steve announced it with his usual enthusiasm, his perfectly tailored navy suit catching the studio lights. "We surveyed 100 people. Top 6 answers on the board. Name someone who always has your back." The board lit up expectantly, waiting for responses that would determine which family controlled the round. Sarah Thompson, Ashley's foster mother, stepped up to the podium first. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair, someone who had dedicated her life to helping children who had nowhere else to go. Without hesitation, she buzzed in. "Your family," she answered confidently, looking back at her team with the assurance of someone who had never questioned that fundamental truth. "Good answer," Steve responded enthusiastically, and the board revealed it was indeed the number one answer. The Thompson family erupted in celebration, high-fiving and hugging as they secured control of the round. But while everyone else was celebrating around her, Ashley stood frozen at the podium. Her face had gone pale, and her hands gripped the buzzer stand so tightly her knuckles went white. The studio lights suddenly felt too bright, the audience noise too loud, and the weight of pretending became unbearable. Steve's comedian instincts kicked in first. He walked over to the family podium with his easy smile, ready to share in their celebration and keep the energy high. "Ashley, you okay there, sweetheart? This is pretty exciting, right?" But when Ashley looked up at him, Steve saw something that stopped him cold. It wasn't excitement or nervousness in her eyes. It was pain so deep and raw that it seemed to swallow all the light around her. It was the look of someone who had just heard something that cut straight to the core of their deepest wound. "Steve," Ashley whispered, her voice so quiet that the microphones barely picked it up. "Can I tell you something that's true?" The studio audience was still buzzing with energy from the previous answer, unaware of the intimate moment unfolding on stage. Steve glanced at the producers in the booth, then back at Ashley. Every instinct told him to keep the show moving, to handle this during commercial break, to maintain the energy and pace that made good television. Instead, he made a choice that would define not just that episode, but his entire legacy as a host. Steve Harvey dropped his cards right there on the studio floor, the papers scattering as they hit the polished surface. "Stop the music," he called out to the production booth, his voice carrying across the studio with an authority that silenced everyone immediately. "Stop everything." The theme music cut out. The audience fell silent. Even the camera operators seemed to sense that something unprecedented was happening. Steve walked closer to Ashley and, without hesitation, gently guided her to the center of the stage, away from the podiums and the bright lights of the game board. He knelt down slightly to meet her eyes, his full attention focused on this 19-year-old girl who clearly had something important to say. "Ashley," he said softly, his voice now stripped of all performance, all entertainment value. This was just Steve Harvey, the man talking to someone who needed to be heard. "What do you want to tell me?" The studio was so quiet, you could hear the air conditioning humming. 200 audience members held their breath. The Williams family, their competitors, watched with growing concern and curiosity. Even the producers in the booth had stopped barking directions into their headsets. Ashley wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and looked directly into Steve's eyes. When she spoke, her voice was clear and strong in a way that surprised everyone who heard it, including herself. "I don't know what that feels like." 3 words that hit the studio like a physical force. The audience gasped audibly. Several people in the front row brought their hands to their mouths. Steve Harvey, the man who had built a career on quick wit and perfect timing, found himself completely speechless. Ashley continued, her voice gaining strength as she spoke the words she'd held inside for 12 years. "I've been in foster care since I was 7 years old. I've lived in 14 different homes. Some of them were good, some of them weren't, but none of them were forever." The silence in the studio was deafening. Steve Harvey, who had hosted thousands of hours of television, who had faced every possible situation a game show could throw at him, found himself in completely uncharted territory. But what happened next is why Steve Harvey isn't just a game show host. He's a human being who understands that some moments transcend television. "The Thompsons are wonderful people," Ashley continued, her voice breaking slightly as she looked toward her foster family. "They've been kinder to me than anyone ever has. They've given me a home, helped me get into college, treated me like I matter, but I still go to sleep every night knowing that I don't really belong anywhere." Steve reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his pocket square, a simple piece of white fabric that he always kept perfectly folded. Without saying a word, he gently wiped the tears from Ashley's face. His own eyes were now clearly filled with emotion. "Ashley," he said, his voice thick with feeling, "how long have you been carrying this inside?" "My whole life," she whispered, I've never had someone who always has my back. I don't know what that feels like. I came on this show because I wanted to pretend, just for one day, that I was part of a real family, but when she said that answer, it just hit me that I'm still pretending. The camera operators continued filming, but by now everyone in the studio understood that they were witnessing something far more important than a game show. This was a young woman facing the deepest kind of loneliness, the kind that comes from never truly belonging anywhere. Subscribe and leave a comment because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Steve stood up slowly, walked to the Williams family podium, and spoke directly to them with the gravity the moment demanded. Williams family, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Would you mind if we stop this game right here? This young lady needs something more important than points on a board. The Williams family patriarch, a man in his 60s who had driven 8 hours from Charlotte to be there, didn't hesitate for even a second. Steve, you do whatever that girl needs. Games don't matter when someone's hurting, but this was the moment no one in the studio and no one watching at home ever saw coming. Steve Harvey walked back to Ashley and did something that no game show host in television history had ever done. He took off his suit jacket, the same jacket he wore for every taping, the one that had become part of his television persona, and he wrapped it around Ashley's small shoulders. Ashley, he said, his voice now clearly audible throughout the silent studio. I want you to listen to me very carefully. You do belong somewhere. You belong right here, right now, in this moment. Do you know how I know that? Ashley shook her head, now completely wrapped in Steve's oversized jacket, looking even smaller but somehow stronger. Because someone who has survived what you've survived, someone who has kept going through 14 different homes, someone who is working 2 jobs to put herself through college, that's not someone who doesn't belong. That's someone who understands what strength really means. But Steve wasn't finished. He turned to address the entire studio, his voice strong and clear. You know what we're going to do? We're going to restart this game. But this time, both families are going to play together for Ashley. Every point anybody scores, every dollar we win, it's all going toward helping Ashley finish college, because that's what family does. The Williams family immediately left their podium and walked across the stage to join the Thompson family. The Williams' teenage daughter took Ashley's hand. The grandmother from Charlotte knelt down and hugged Ashley like she was her own granddaughter. What happened next was pure magic. Both families played together, calling out answers, celebrating every point as one team. Steve abandoned the traditional rules entirely. He made up new questions on the spot, questions designed to make Ashley laugh. When she giggled at his silly faces, the entire studio erupted in applause. By the end of that impossible episode, Ashley had answered 3 questions herself. Her answers weren't on the board, but they were better than any survey response. When Steve asked, "Name something that makes you strong," Ashley had answered, "Surviving." When he asked, "Name something everyone deserves," she had said, "To be wanted." When he asked, "Name something that never runs out," Ashley smiled for the first time that day and said, "Hope." But the moment that defined everything came at the very end. Steve knelt down next to Ashley one more time, and he whispered something in her ear that the microphones didn't pick up. Whatever he said made Ashley's face light up with genuine joy. Later, the producers would reveal that Steve had given Ashley his personal phone number and told her that she could call him anytime, day or night, whenever she felt scared or alone, or just needed to talk to someone who understood what it meant to keep fighting when everything felt impossible. The episode aired 3 months later, and it became the highest-rated Family Feud episode in the show's history. But more importantly, it raised over $2 million for foster care organizations across the country. Ashley's story sparked a national conversation about the foster care system and the children who age out without ever finding permanent families. But the real change happened quietly, behind the scenes. The Thompson family, moved by Steve's response to Ashley, and by seeing their foster daughter's pain so clearly, began the formal adoption process. On Ashley's 20th birthday, 6 months after the episode aired, she legally became Ashley Thompson for real. Ashley graduated from Portland State University 2 years later, with a degree in social work, her tuition paid for by the scholarship fund that Steve Harvey had established in her name. She now works for the Oregon Department of Human Services, helping other foster children navigate the system that she survived. The suit jacket that Steve gave her that day hangs framed in her office, next to her college diploma and her adoption certificate. And every year on the anniversary of that episode, Steve Harvey receives the same text message from Ashley. Still belonging, still growing. Thank you for showing me what family really means. The lesson that 19-year-old Ashley taught a television studio, a game show host, and millions of viewers is simple but profound. Sometimes the most important moments happen when we stop performing and start being honest about our pain. Sometimes a foster child in a thrift store dress can teach everyone watching what it really means to belong. Steve Harvey learned something that day that changed how he approaches every show, every contestant, every moment he spends in front of those cameras. He learned that sometimes the game isn't the point. Sometimes a young woman who has never belonged anywhere can teach you that the most important victories happen when you stop playing by the rules and start playing by the heart. Ashley's episode is still talked about in the Family Feud community. Staff members who were there that day tell new employees about it, not as entertainment, but as a reminder of what the show can be at its very best. Steve Harvey has said in interviews that Ashley's episode changed him as a host and as a person. I realized that day that my job isn't to run a game show, he said. My job is to create moments where people can be their best selves. Ashley showed me what that looks like. And Ashley Thompson, who spent the first 19 years of her life never truly belonging anywhere, now helps other children find their way home. Because that's what love looks like. That's what family sounds like. And that's what happens when a 19-year-old girl teaches a television studio full of adults what it really means to have someone in your corner.